See, I'll call Rafa.
Sorry, sir.
How are influence operations distinct from disinformation? They're related, pero they're different.
Influence operations are strategic communications that aim to
I mean, how are they different from disinformation? Diba yun yung sinabi ni Alright. At in fact, Rafa, what chance?
Disinformation is deliberately sharing false information, but influence operations goes beyond that. So it's technically not illegal, but it's not good as well, since it actually prepares for the long game. It's not just disinformation that has been surfacing all over the web, but there's also changing the historical narrative, deviating away from the Islamic fact.
Okay.
It's a long game.
It's a
In
long
comparison
game.
to disinformation.
So they're different because in disinformation, you deliberately spread falsehoods. This is not necessarily the case in influence operations. Their influence in this sense is much more insidious. It's very hard to detect. You don't know that they're influencing you while you're doing the vlogs you've watched before or the news you've encountered online, right? So they influence you not with falsehoods, but they influence you by taking advantage of particular narratives. That's the key difference. You could say that we could include this information within the ambit of influence operations, but influence operations is a much more expansive and capacious term to describe ongoing practices online. And sige, ako chance first. Yeah, sige.
It's very strategic, like whenever you accept cookies, you are then trapped into a system that only reaffirms your stances, so that it's like you are being gated from other information.
You may think of the term influence operations as well, diba? We said that influence operations also comprise of these, right? So they're not just echo chambers, but they're also practices. They also comprise, right, platforms, personalities, and they all function simultaneously to maintain polarization in democracies like the Philippines. So we said last time that the question which people are to how to address is, well, why is Philippine society polarized? And it attributes that outcome largely to influence operations. Okay? So now we are going to be encountering a different answer to that question. Right? Through the lens of moral politics and dual public spheres. This is written by Rotaro Kusama. Okay? We can discuss the relevance of the later on. Right? To what extent is his theory at this time, which was formulated at this time, relevant. But I would still nonetheless say that moral politics is very much relevant. Right? But the specificities of the theory is something which we can discuss. Okay? So, what is the reading about? What is the question? What is the central question that the reading sought to address? Okay? So, I know that I have students from social science, of course, we've been having this reading. Right? So, what is the central question that the reading sought to address? Well, first, of course, why is the society polarized? But also asks the question, why did Philippine democracy stall? Right? Why is it that Philippine democracy failed to fulfill its supposed objective of generating equality? Why is it that Philippine democracy failed to meet its supposed vision of making life better for everyday Filipinos? Right? The promise of democracy is essentially not compromise but understanding. But why is it that Philippine democracy is instead generating misunderstanding? Right? So there's an inherent problem with our system of democracy according to society. Right? So why did Philippine democracy stall? Previously, we talked about two perspectives. Right? Two dominant perspectives to study Philippine politics. right? And each of these perspectives have an answer to that question. Why did Philippine democracy stall? Right? The elite democracy perspective would say that Philippine democracy stalled because elites have so much autonomy to shape Philippine democracy to their liking. Right? That's their answer. The patron-client framework would say, well, Philippine democracy is stalling because of the proliferation of patron-client ties. The more money you have, the likely you will win an election. But Otaru Kusaka is providing us with another answer. Elites play a very important role, yes. Patronage plays a very important role, yes, that's true. But ultimately, kung Otaru Kusaka, it is the moralization of politics that has led to our current state. Right? On the one hand, the middle class view the urban poor as enemies to be defeated and vanquished. Their perspective, it's the urban poor to be blamed for the rise of leaders like Joseph Estrada, the rise of leaders like Rodrigo Duterte. They are to be blamed. And the fault lies squarely on them. But the urban poor, right, the masses, quote unquote, have a very different perspective. They are being oppressed because the middle class support oppressive policies. As a result, because of this moralization, the middle class and the urban poor can't come into agreement. Right now, what we see is this scenario where the middle class and the urban poor view each other as enemies as opposed to partners. That's the problem. It's the moralization of politics creating deep-seated divisions in Philippine society. Right? It's creating what Kusaka calls agonistic relations between the middle class and the poor. You have the contact zone. Yes, in the contact zone, the poor and the middle class can have encounters with each other. But to Kusaka, ultimately, the contact zone failed in bridging this divide. That's the idea. Okay? And we're going to be talking about more the moralization of politics as it manifested in Philippine history, particularly the case of the EDSAs. You have EDSA 1, EDSA 2, and then EDSA 3. You would know that, because some would say that there were only 2 EDSAs. Right? But Kusaka asserting is that there was also another EDSA, EDSA 3, which history would tend to neglect. Diba? I remember, I was in, I think that perspective holds true until today. A lot of people would tend to believe there were only 2 EDSAs. I remember I was in the EDSA rally. It's 1191. I remember whoever was speaking there, sabi niya na parang buhayin natin ulit yung diwa ng EDSA. Nagkadalawang EDSA na tayo, mag-EDSA ulit tayo. Right? So, it says something about how certain groups of people view history. Right? But again, it's not saying that there are 3 EDSAs. And to recognize EDSA would of course be to suspend one's moral judgments and see the bigger picture. Right? To judge objectively as opposed to judging morally. Okay? Sige, let's start. So, what is moral politics? Smarter here. Wouldn't try. What is moral politics? Sige. Okay.
Moral politics is when the political action, the environment is being divided into 2 parts. It's we versus them, and then usually you have the perspective of good versus evil in moral politics.
Okay, so it's a kind of politics that creates divisions. That's one. You mentioned 2 groups about good and evil. Sige, thank you so much. Sige, so we're starting point. How does the reading define it? Pero that's the, how does the reading define it verbatim? What's the reading saying? Sige, I'll teach.
Understand this distinction. Moral politics is politics that
good. So it's a kind of politics that creates groups that are seen as good or evil, and the point is that it creates some kind of a demarcation line between the two. How many demarcation lines were identified? How many there were?
I think there's only one demarcation line.
Only one? Sure.
It depends on what defines.
Sige. Let's clarify that. So, isa lang ba? I saw Pat first.
From although not explicitly stated, I think one can like assume that there's two demarcation line present. So first between the quote-unquote civic and the quote-unquote classes sphere, yun yung dalawa na.
Yung sphere. Iba yan.
po.
Iba yung demarcation line.
So parang may demarcation line between those two. And like when it benefits them, nagkakaroon ng parang salibwet yung dalawa against the parang elites of democracy na
Sige, I'll get back to you. I'll call Jeff first.
Sa pagkakaalala ko po sa reading, may dalawang na-mention pang
Okay, good.
demarcation lines. Yung class demarcation at yung moral demarcation.
Very good. Okay. So you have two demarcation lines. So iba yung tinutukoy ni Pat. Right? So Pat mentioned the two spheres. Right? Mass sphere and civic sphere. Iba yung demarcation line because we speak of demarcation lines. Ito yung naghahati na dalawang grupo. It's what divides two groups. Right? So you have the moral demarcation line and then you have the class demarcation line. Okay? So that's our baseline definition of moral politics. Again, it is a politics that creates groups that are seen as either good or evil, and it's a kind of politics that draws a demarcation line between the two. Right? They're separated by this so-called demarcation line. We'll talk about what that is soon. But before that, let's say that moral politics builds on three fundamental premises. Okay, so before we talk about specific theory, again, moral politics builds on three premises. Premise number one, okay? So, what is morality? The basic definition of morality. What is morality? Hindi na ba dito siya sa definition ko sa akin? Okay? Morality. What is morality? Taken was outside to something. So outside to we talk about morality a lot. Plato, Aristotle, right? So you've encountered this. Okay, so what is morality? Nabanggit na siya sa definition. Sige, El.
It's what people consider as good and bad.
Okay. Basic definition of morality. What do you consider good or bad? Right? And the idea here is that, well, moral politics is really a perspective that takes morality as a standard with importance. And the idea, the first premise of moral politics is that on a daily basis, on an everyday basis, well, we cast moral judgments. Right? On an everyday basis, we think in terms of the standards of morality. Right? Should I go to class or not? Should I do this exam or not? You see someone, crossing the street, even if they shouldn't be crossing there, what do you think? Either you would think that what you're doing is permissible, or you would think that what you're doing is illegal, and therefore they should be fined. On an everyday basis, you are thinking in terms of moral standards. Right? You enter the classroom and then you smell a whiff of cigarettes. It comes to mind, if someone may be smoking, you ask yourself, is smoking good or bad? Right? Should they smoke here or should they smoke elsewhere? Right? So the point is that on a daily basis, every day, we think in terms of these standards of morality. And Kusaka is saying that, well, politics is not exempt from that. Even in the context of politics, we think in terms of good and evil. We think in terms of good and bad. Right? So the point is that, well, morality is also subjectively constructed, because we construct our standards of morality based on our upbringing and experiences. Chance.
Morality is a social construct, and in this context, morality is what that creates group, and this is the basis for collective action.
Okay, very good. Okay? Sige, that's the second premise. Right? When we think in terms of morality, when we cast moral judgments onto others, do we do this as an individual, or do we do this as a group? Right? Kusaka would say that we don't do this in isolation. We think in terms of morality as a group. So we're saying that morality is ultimately relational. It's not something we do on our own. Right? So Kusaka is saying that when we cast moral judgments onto others, we do it as a collective. And when we cast moral judgments onto others, we think in terms of a collective. Right? Someone is participating in this act, but we would think that there are other people who would tend to act similarly. Right? That's the idea. So as a result, there are people who tend to have similar understandings of morality, similar conditions, but there are also other people who have, completely different conceptions of morality because of a very different upbringing. So we're saying that, well, it's a collective process. We don't do this in isolation. Right? That's the point. Okay? So we'll give us examples of what that looks like later on. Okay? What does it look like when we cast moral judgments on others as a collective that happens in real life? But for now, just try to appreciate that premise. It's a collective process. Okay, third premise, okay? So, now we've come to an understanding that morality is not done in isolation. Okay? So, the question now is, what informs our morality as individuals and groups? But what informs it? Diba? So on a daily basis, we think in terms of morality, but there is something, there is this social structure, if you will, that informs how we think in terms of morality. Right? So it's again going back to this idea in the readings we encountered previously, that social structure shapes our life. Right? That's one important premise of sociology. We look outside the individual to understand collective behavior. Right? So if differences in morality is the outcome, then what shapes this outcome? Diba, kumbaga, what is the causal factor? But what shapes how we think in terms of morality? Pat, raise your hand.
I think religion.
Religion.
And moral authority.
That's one. But there's something much more fundamental than religion. It's not just religion. Okay? Sige, I'll rate this. Okay. Law. Not law. Sige, alcohol. Oh my God, name. Yes.
Johan.
Johan! Okay, Johan, yes.
Sir, social class.
Your class, basically. Okay. It's not law. Because, well, we talk about the law. The ways of course. But one could say as well that the law is also the resultant of class struggles. Right? Just an outcome of pre-existing structures. Right? But it's class. So ultimately class, according to Kusaka, that shapes our understanding of morality. So what would the Plato-Klein framework assert? It would say that the most basic political unit in Philippine politics is factions. Kusama would say something that it's not factions, it's class. Right? He's saying that class ultimately shapes our conception of morality. Okay? So now, let's ask ourselves, what is class? So far, we've established three premises of moral politics. Firstly, right, moral politics takes morality seriously. Right? And again, when we speak of morality, we're talking about differences in terms of right and wrong. Secondly, it's saying that the process by which we think in terms of moral standards is a collective process. Thirdly, it's saying that ultimately class shapes our understanding of morality. So now, let's ask ourselves, what is class? I'll go back to Rafa. What is your understanding of class? What is your appreciation of the term class? What's the term you're often class struggle?
I think class can be identified as income.
Income. Okay, sige. That's one measurement of class. Income. Right? You look at the election surveys conducted by the Social Welfare Station in the Philippines, they use income primarily to measure one's class. What bracket do you belong to? You earn 10,000 or less. I'm not too familiar with statistics. Say if you earn 10,000 or less, you belong to class E. 10,000 to 30,000, you belong to class B. Something like that. Right? That's one measure of class. And in sociology, you would call that a Weberian definition of class. Right? But here, Kusaka takes a much more expansive definition of the term. We're not just talking about income, it's something else. But it's related, but it's not just income. Kumbaga. Diba? Sige, I'll give chance to others. Name, oh my God.
Jana.
Jana. Jana, sige, go.
Sir, socio-economic status.
What do you mean by that?
Sir, yung education level mo siguro.
Okay.
And then, how much money you make.
Okay, how much money you make. You mentioned education. That can also be another measurement of class. What else? Sige, alcohol. Sige, Fred.
I think the most important definition of class for all intents and purposes is your access to the privileges of society.
Access to privileges like what?
For example, your access to privileges such as healthcare, such as education, such as information, for example. And those things can shape how you understand or conceptualize morality.
Okay, so your access to certain privileges, healthcare, but also a measurement of class. Anyone else? Very, very good, ah? Very good. Alcohol, Mika, yes. Language. Okay, very good.
Education nila English po eh. So they grew up using that language na pag nag-English na talaga mo mas valuable yung sinasabi. Kasi kapag hindi mo naiintindihan yun, you're not knowledgeable enough or knowledgeable enough to be like as good as
You do not like standing
Yes.
in the democracy against the language of the elite, something like that. Yeah, very good. Diba? So you have, a lot of markers of, we call that class differentiation. A lot of markers of like what represents privilege. But in one marker of class differentiation within the Philippines is of course English language. Right? And really, I recall, I remember there was this time when, wala na ngayon, you know yung see what happened there. Remember that? you would ask yourself, why is that? So it's okay. How do I explain it? It's hard to explain what habit really is, but it's a meme. It's a meme. You might want to ask yourselves, so why is that? Right? Why is it fun? Okay, and the more audience perspective might say something about that. Right? So the idea here is that when we speak of class, we're not just talking about income. We're talking about education, like John said. We're talking about different privileges that people enjoy. Healthcare is one. Housing, right? Where do you live? Right? The next reading, the one by Garrido, will talk about class differences as finding this in living arrangements and housing. Where do you live? That can be a marker of class difference. That is a marker of class difference. The use of English. Who can speak in English and who finds difficulty understanding the language, it can also be a marker of education inequality, therefore class difference. Right? Alright. So like the point here is that when we speak again of class, it's not just income. Because the idea here put forward by Gonzaga is that, well, we embody our class. We embody our class status. We embody our class status. Okay? It manifests in the gadgets we use. We use the latest iPhone, or we use an old version of a Nokia phone. That can be a marker of class. Right? The clothes you wear, that's also a marker of class. El, you're raising your hand.
Yes. Also, there's a difference of morality.
Okay, we'll get to that. Very good. But there's also, as a result, a difference in terms of morality. But just to go back to the point, when we speak of class, we're not just talking about differences in terms of income. Right? When we speak of class, when we speak of a class of people, we're talking about people who inhabit similar living conditions. We're talking about a group of people that share similar cultural practices and resources. We're talking about a group of people that also, as a result, share similar economic opportunities. Right? That's what we speak of when we define class. Hindi lang siya income. It's also about cultural similarities. It's also about similarities in terms of one's living conditions. It's also similarities in terms of one's educational background. Similarities in terms of one's lifestyle. That's class. And in sociology, the way we would call that in more fancy term, in the higher sociology class, that's the more Bourdieuian definition of class. That's how Pierre Bourdieu would define class. Similarities in terms of living conditions. But Kusaka doesn't use the term living conditions. He uses another term. He uses the term sphere. Right? He's saying that the class constitutes a group of people that inhabit a similar sphere. Right? And in the reading, how many spheres were identified? What are these spheres? Sige, sige, Jana.
Mass and civic spheres.
Mass and civic sphere. Okay? So therefore you have two classes. Right? The civic sphere and the mass sphere. And so again, therefore, to be clear, when we speak of the middle class and say the urban poor, we're not just talking about two groups of people differentiated by their income. They're also differentiated by their lifestyle, their educational background, their cultural upbringing, their cultural practices, their living conditions. Right? So as a result, the terms urban poor and middle class, they're not just economic categories, but they're also, in many ways, cultural categories. Okay? Sige, so we have two spheres, right? The mass sphere and the civic sphere. Earlier, Elle said that they also, as a result, because of their differences of upbringing, have very different appreciations, right, of morality. As a result, when they talk about politics very differently, they value different things. Okay, they prioritize certain things over others. As a result, what they prioritize, that they tend to be different, right? Iba-iba. Right? So the point is that because they inhabit very different spheres, they develop very different moral standards, which they therefore use and invoke in political decisions. Right? Sige, so let's differentiate the morality of the civic sphere from the mass sphere. Right? So the civic sphere, we're talking about people who are guardians of middle class status. Right? And then in the mass sphere, we're talking about people who belong to the urban poor, the poor basically. Right? And the idea here is that the urban poor and the middle class have very different political behaviors. Because again, they have very different moral standards. And they develop different moral standards because they inhabit different spheres or life worlds. Right? So, sige, let's assess this difference in terms of morality. Ano yung pinagkaiba? What is the difference between the morality of the civic sphere and the morality of the mass sphere? So, of course, isang consequence ito is that they would vote differently. And at times they would vote similar politicians. Right? But their justification for voting these same politicians was of course different. Pero idea is that their political behavior is different from each other because they have different moral standards. So, ano yung pinagkaiba ng morality nila? Would like to try? Sige, oh my God, I forgot your name. Name please. Ben, yes.
Okay, so kung saan ka first mentioned yung morality ng civic sphere, where they are more inclined to value policy-based debate, accountability, transparency of government, and they are more opposed to the elite domination or the quote-unquote trapo or traditional politicians.
Okay, yeah, sige.
From my understanding, their values are more geared towards a morality of capitalism and as a means of reforming a corrupt and inefficient state. And on the other hand, the mass sphere, they're more inclined to values of freedom, equality, and are more geared towards parang the humble nature in politics, wherein they give much more importance to dignity and the parang their asserted need for their daily lives.
Okay, sige, very good. Okay, sige, Ben, you mentioned trapos. What are trapos?
Tapos po are parang abbreviation sa English of traditional politicians.
And what do traditional politicians do?
Parang traditional politicians are those na from well-known names in politics or are politicians that use their power as a means to exploit the poor and save power.
Okay, so basically traditional politicians are those who are basically corrupt. Corrupt. So, diba the term trapos is a term which is a combination of two words. It's traditional politicians. So when you use the term trapos and here in the Philippines, you're basically describing politicians who often corrupt, belong to political dynasties. And to be clear, it's not just the middle class who hates traditional politicians. The mass sphere also hates traditional politicians. Right? Next, very quickly lang. Sige, Benny mentioned capitalism. What did you mean by that? So what did you mention?
Parang
so far, di ba may differences? We'll elaborate each difference later on. Pero so far, just to be clear, there is this shared hatred for corruption. The mass in the cities really hate corruption. They hate it when politicians use public funds for private interests, for private gain. Diba? Pero, sige Ben, very quickly, you mentioned capitalism. What did you mention?
Sa civic sphere po kasi, they parang support the morality of capitalism as a means to parang eliminate the elite in politics.
So they support capitalism. Well, not just that, no, but they also support capitalism because they believe that hard work is the primary virtue, right? And instead of addressing deep-seated inequalities, if you want to rise the social ladder, achieve economic mobility, you just simply have to work hard. That is the ethos of capitalism. You have to work hard. Okay? So, thank you so much, Ben. Okay? So, what is the difference? Well, there are differences in terms of what they would value in the political arena. What do members of the civic sphere value? They value things like, let's say, good governance. They value knowledge in terms of policy making. They value things like, transparency. They believe that if you are going to run for politics, it's not enough for you to have a deep-seated, it's not enough for you to empathize with the poor, right? It's also important that you are knowledgeable in terms of policy making. You have to be quote-unquote educated, right? That is their requirement. Kailangan edukado ka. You're not educated, you are ill-suited for politics. And what does education look like? It means maybe having a college degree, having a master's degree, having a doctorate, right? To the middle class, it's important to have a doctorate, a master's degree. You're a lawyer, you're a doctor. If you want to engage in politics, that's what they value. They also believe that they're taxpayers, right? They pay huge amount of tax, therefore they have more claims to a lot of public goods, right? So therefore they would tend to believe that it's wrong for the urban poor to enjoy free housing. Why? Because they don't pay tax. That's their claim. Even if they do, right? What do the poor value? Well, because they value something different. Right? They also share this hatred for traditional politicians. They share this hatred for corruption. But there are things which are more valuable to them. They want to be respected. They value dignity. They want to be treated like human beings. Because dignity is something which is consistently being deprived from them. How are they being deprived of dignity? That's something which both the Pusaka reading and the Garrido reading will illustrate. But the point here is that in Philippine democracy, those who occupy the lowest rungs of society are consistently being deprived of human dignity. They also value respect. They want to be respected. They hate it when their bosses or of middle class status scream at them, shout at them, degrade them. They hate that. Right? They also value survival. They want to survive. Right? This might not be a concern of those who belong to the middle class because they enjoy so many privileges and they might be earning enough to sustain their daily needs. But this is not true for those living in informal center communities. Right? Di ba merong term, di ba, is isang kahig, isang tuka. Right? Basically, you live day to day. Right? Your concern is to bring food to the table today. And you don't think about tomorrow. Because your concern is to survive today because you don't have enough resources to live today. It's the point that they value survival and they value politicians who help them in their need to survive. So because of this difference in terms of morality, they have very different political behaviors. Right? And they would view certain practices differently. You would think of, let's say, vote buying. From the perspective of the middle class, vote buying is wrong. Though here in the Philippines, it's traditional for politicians to buy the vote of their voters. Right? Voters don't just vote for politicians because they care about their policies. Right? What matters is that, well, they receive money. Right? That's the reality of things. Right? Patronage matters. From the perspective of the middle class, that's a form of corruption. It's wrong. Right? And that's how we would tend to assess a lot of government policies like the ayuda being given by the DSWD. It's a form of patronage. Right? But from the perspective of the urban poor, they would tend to do things differently. It's not a form of corruption. It is, but really, it's a form of survival. That's what they value. Okay? So you have differences in terms of morality, right? And ultimately, it's this difference in terms of morality that creates this deep-seated divide between the mass and the civic sphere. But Kusaka also says that there are opportunities for cooperation. Where does that happen and how does that happen? Don't let it try. Diba? Hindi lang sila nag-aaway-away. There are also times when they cooperate with each other. Right? There are conditions that promote their cooperation. This cooperation takes place somewhere. And he accounts for that in his theory of the dual public spheres. Diba? At what end?
Yes. They happen in contact zones, which can sometimes be modern institutions.
Okay.
Like the media, like schools, churches, different associations.
Very good. So you have the contact zone. It's this arena. So if the mass sphere, the public sphere, will tend to be arenas for disagreement, right? We tend to disagree because we live in completely different life worlds. There is still this possibility for cooperation between these two classes. You would call that the contact zone. And what does a contact zone look like? Well, you would think of the contact zone in terms of, let's say, NGOs, right? Non-government organizations that provide assistance to resource-deprived groups of people. They're contact zones. And our university, UP, is basically filled with organizations that serve as a bridge between the middle class and the urban poor. You would think of immersions. You would think of, let's say, instances where certain urban poor groups would need support in proposing a housing plan for their community. What do? Who do they approach? They approach NGOs. And these NGOs are largely consist of professionals of middle class background. And they provide them with the kind of technical assistance which they need to develop a housing plan. So they serve as a kind of they serve as a contact zone as a result. So there's still this possibility of cooperation, and you would find that possibility in NGOs, in associations, in the church even. Right? They serve as this possibility for cooperation. Okay? So before we go forward, diba last time we said that there are two demarcation lines. Again, the class demarcation line and the moral demarcation line. What purpose do they serve in Kusaka's theory of the dual public spheres? What's the difference between the class demarcation line and the moral demarcation line? Alcohol. Mika, yes. Sorry.
Sir, basically class demarcation like by more concerns like one is unequal distribution of resources. And mas fix po yung distinction between the two classes.
Okay.
And for moral demarcation line naman po is different concepts of good and evil. So mas fluid po, mas medyo
Okay, sige, very good. So, differences between the mass sphere and the civic sphere are grounded on objective class differences. Right? It's ultimately the class demarcation line that separates the mass sphere from the civic sphere. But you also have what you would call the moral demarcation line. And compared to the class demarcation line, which is much more fixed, it's really dependent on the state of your economy. You have the moral demarcation line, and it's much more fluid. Why? Because members of the mass sphere and the context, and mass sphere and the civic sphere constantly engage in struggle to define morality. At times, they might develop competing definitions of morality, but at times, they might have definitions of morality which have similarities and agreements. Right? So what's happening here is that the civic sphere, the mass sphere engage in what you would call, in the term here is hegemonic struggles. They're engaged in hegemonic struggles to define morality in a way that would be beneficial to them. Right? And these hegemonic struggles have different outcomes. What are these outcomes? Well, the outcome of these different outcomes are often different. The outcomes of these struggles are basically different definitions of morality. Right? At times, they might come up with a definition of morality that would provide for the conditions for agreement. Other times, they would develop very competing definitions of morality. Right? So that these are outcomes of what you would call these hegemonic struggles to define morality. Because again, to Osaka, morality is fluid. The moral demarcation line is fluid. It's constantly being redefined and renegotiated by members of the mass sphere and the civic sphere. Okay? Kusaka in particular identifies 4 outcomes of these hegemonic struggles. And he says that he defines these outcomes as moral discourses. Okay? You have 2 moral discourses that promote division. Right? When one moral discourse emerges, the other, simultaneously emerges. You have another moral discourse that promotes solidarity. And then you have another discourse that promotes solidarity, yes, but also simultaneously promotes inequality between members of the mass sphere and the civic sphere. Okay? Say quickly, what are these 4 moral discourses? Sige, what is the moral discourse that promotes solidarity? It promotes the solidarity of the nation. Moral nationalism. Okay. Sino yung we and sino yung they sa moral nationalism? So at times, the mass might come up with a definition of morality that promotes solidarity. And you would call that kind of morality, or that moral discourse, moral nationalism. Who is the enemy here? Sino yung we, sino yung they? Sino yung RA?
Moral nationalism, we is the people, and they are the corrupt.
Okay, so they consists largely of corrupt politicians. And the we comprises of the people. And when we speak of the people, we're not just talking about the middle class. We're talking about members of the middle class and members of the mass sphere. The civic sphere and the mass sphere unite together to oppose corrupt politicians. So what's the basis of unity here? Right? The basis of unity is not really this deep-seated dissatisfaction with capitalism. It's not this deep-seated dissatisfaction with inequality. It's really corruption. And the point that Kusaka is making is that corruption, historically speaking, has become the foremost issue that unites the middle class and the mass sphere. And we saw that in EDSA 1. And arguably, well, we're seeing that also happening today. Right? People are mad about corruption. They're mad about the fact that politicians no, not just nationally, but locally as well, are using public funds for their private interests. They're using public funds to buy Lamborghinis. They're using public funds to buy Ferraris. They're using public funds to buy luxurious houses. But they're using public funds to buy, they're using public funds to, for example, buy an elevator in their own house. It's like that. Crazy. People are mad about that. Right? That's the point. Okay? And you saw moral nationalism manifest in which EDSA? EDSA 1. Okay? Then you have two other moral discourses that promote division. Okay? What are these two moral discourses that promote immoral, these so-called moral division of the nation? Anyone? Sige, I'll call Brian. Yes.
I think it's civic inclusivism and civic exclusivism.
You're right about the second one. It's civic exclusivism. Because yeah, you're wrong about the first one. Correct answer is populism. Okay? So, when civic exclusivism emerges, populism would likewise emerge amongst members of the mass sphere. So let's define each term. Let's start with populism. What is populism? Here we're taking a very specific definition of populism, one informed by class inequalities. What is populism? Let's go close. Populism. Well, let's try. Sige, I'll call Dre.
It's when leaders write popular ideas for the alternative law, and in result creates a suggested mentality.
Okay, sige, let's start with that. Us versus them mentality.
Between their supporters and those who don't support them.
Okay, sige. You know, populism do not necessarily refer to a politician. Pero kasi, populism is rather a kind of division. Right? It's a kind of division. And broadly speaking, I'm not taking the exact definition. It's a kind of division. Sige, ako chance first. Sige, go. Sige, go.
This exists in the mass arena, wherein yung oppressed or people and they or ready to oppress us.
Sige. Okay, sige. You're correct. That's Kosaka's definition of populism. But broadly speaking, just for everyone's sake, when we speak of populism, we're talking about a political division that divides people between those who are so-called virtuous and dangerous. It's a division between the virtuous people and the dangerous others. Right? So here, populism in the Philippines might take the form of, let's say, dangerous drug addicts and virtuous law abiders. That's a kind of populism because it divides people along neat political lines. But here, especially in global south countries, populism is informed by class divisions. It's often a socially constructed division between the rich and the poor. Right? So here, Kusaka takes that definition. When we speak of populism, we're largely talking about a moral division between the corrupt rich, immoral rich, and the virtuous poor who are being oppressed by the rich. Because they are oppressed, therefore, they should have greater standing in democracy because they are ultimately the ones who are oppressed. And it's a kind of moral discourse that, of course, firstly politicizes the poor, but it's also a moral discourse that pits them against the middle class. They are the enemies we have to defeat. That's the point. Okay? Then you have civic exclusivism. How is it different? Sige, Annie.
Civic exclusivism is the civic sphere. They paint the mass sphere as ignorant or someone na dapat excluded in terms of voting and everything. Dahil, ang lagi nilang argument ay hindi sila educated enough to yun ang, dahil nga dun sa exclusivism na nangyayari from the civic sphere, yung mass sphere, ang tingin na nila sa civic sphere ay kalaban na nila.
Sige. Sino yung we? Sino yung they sa civic exclusivism?
Yung we ng civic exclusivism, yung mga middle class.
Okay, they're the we.
Tapos yung they na, yung mga masses.
The righteous middle class, they're the we. Yung they, of course, includes the poor. But it also includes who?
Corrupt politician.
You're raising your hand.
Corrupt politicians.
Very good. Corrupt politicians too. Right? So the idea here is that, well, enemies aren't just corrupt politicians. Enemies here are also the poor who vote for them to support them politically. They're to be blamed for ills of Philippine democracy. Right? They're the enemies. So they also have to be defeated. There was at one point in the reading, Kusama talks about how certain segments of the middle class were very much supportive of depriving the poor of voting rights. Why? Because they believe that they're not voting, they're just being paid to support particular politicians. They're being duped, they're being tricked, so why let them vote? They're not exercising their voting rights properly. Diba? It's their claim. So if we have, as a result, that their claim is that, well, if we have age limits of voting, why can't we also put these similar economic restrictions in voting? With the absence of these restrictions, makes people vote for politicians who they don't necessarily support. So we do. That's what they believe. So to make Philippine democracy better, well, you have to deprive the urban poor of political rights. It's their belief. Right? So the solution, therefore, to make Philippine democracy better is just simply limiting, right, access to political rights. That's their claim. They also believe that they're taxpayers, right? They're taxpayers, therefore, why should we be supporting the so-called illegal livelihoods of the poor? Right? They're selling goods, they're selling food, but they're not paying tax. That's unfair. If you want to make urban governance much efficient, better, well, deprive these people of space. Because they're not paying taxes. That's their claim. Okay? So if populism pushes the poor to view the middle class as enemies, civic exclusivism likewise pushes the middle class to view the poor as enemies. And when both simultaneously emerge, you won't have agreement. Right? You would have instead conflict, violence. That's the point. Then you have another, unique type of relationship. That's the one mentioned by Brian. That's civic inclusivism. How is civic inclusivism different from civic exclusivism? Yes, sorry, the name. Dia, yes.
The difference between civic inclusivism and exclusivism is that it mainly talks about in here is the reading, it talks about seeking to include the people, the poor people in the citizenry. But it is different because it wants to partner up with the state officials, or basically involve the state officials in the movement that they are pursuing.
Involve the state officials? Just state officials?
But also the educated and skilled
Sige, okay, sige. Sino ulit yung, sino yung they sa civic inclusivism?
only the corrupt.
Only the corrupt politicians. So those who invite civic inclusivist attitudes don't view the poor as enemies to be vanquished. That's the point. They view rather corrupt politicians as the enemies who we have to defeat collectively. Their objective is not to deprive the urban poor of voting rights. Their objective is to transform them into moral citizens like them. Their objective is to transform them into people capable of thinking just like them. So on the one hand, yes, they recognize these so-called deep-seated inequalities in Philippine society, unlike those who imbibe civic exclusivist attitudes, then it's really just before making bad decisions. That's why we're in this, economic state, right? But those who imbibe civic exclusivist attitude, it's more than bad choices. It's also about bad systems. And you're saying you have to correct that. You have to correct these bad systems. Okay? But to correct these bad systems, we don't deprive the poor of voting rights. We equip them with the frameworks to better make decisions. Okay? To correct these so-called deep-seated inequalities. Okay? So their idea is that, well, if they think just like us, we would be in a better state. So the objective is to educate them. That's the idea. So those who support this moral discourse would tend to believe that voters' education would be the solution to our society's problems. Educate them, they would be in a better position to make smarter decisions when they cast their vote in the ballot box. That's the idea. It's not a perspective that appreciates the morality of urban poor in its own terms. Right? It's a perspective that appreciates their morality from their perspective. Because they appreciate their morality from their perspective, they tend to say that, well, your morality is wrong and we want to correct it. That's the idea. So it's really a kind of solidarity grounded on, middle class, how would you call it? Middle class. What's the third? Middle class. Parang mayabang sila. Right? That's the idea. It's really this moral discourse grounded on middle class exceptionalism. Very good. Yeah, that's the term, exceptionalism. Okay? That's the idea. And it might be a better alternative to civic exclusivism, but it nonetheless promotes division. Right? Because how would those from the mass sphere assess their actions? That's the question. Okay? So now, let's go back. Let's talk about antagonism. Ultimately, this is what moral politics promotes. It promotes antagonism. It promotes divisions. In a society dominated by the ethic of antagonism, we fail to see each other eye to eye. We fail to recognize the legitimacy of those in the other side of the political fence. That's the problem. But Kusaka was proposing an alternative to antagonism. What is that? And how is it different from antagonism? Sige. Sige, ako na dito. Sige, what is antagonism?
Basically, antagonism is more of a positive outcome arising from the civic inclusivism. So yung antagonism is when conflicting parties remain morally antagonistic over good versus evil, but they recognize each other's legitimacy. Doon sa democratic space na naroon sila.
Good.
This leads to yung parang na-mention na nalilito sa avoidance na excessive aggravation dahil nga sa antagonism na mainit tapos
Very good. So what is the difference between antagonism and agonism? Well, is agonism saying that we should simply agree? Diba? Should we just compromise our values and beliefs? Is that what agonism is saying? It's not. Diba? Agonism is an ethic. It's inviting you to take a moral stand on things. But it's saying that it's all right to disagree. That's a sign of a healthy democracy. But again, diba, going back to our discussion on parallel public spheres, right? The true litmus test of the robustness of democracy would be qualitative public spheres. Diba? If you want a healthy democracy, people need to have the desire to engage in debate and discussions. But you can't have that desire if first and foremost you view others as enemies of wish. Agonism is saying, yes, you can have different viewpoints, you can have different values, you can have different beliefs, but it is important to recognize other values, other belief systems. Because, of course, debates are grounded first and foremost on recognition of the other. If you don't recognize their legitimacy, you can't have a debate. That's the point. So agonism again is a type of antagonism because it involves disagreement, but it's disagreement which is healthy. It's disagreement which would promote discussion on important policy issues. But from the get-go, we can't have a discussion, we can't have a debate if we can't have that, baseline understanding that we are all in possession of a legitimate viewpoint. Right? That's the idea. And that's the alternative that Kusaka is promoting. But the problem is that we cannot reach that stage at the development of democracy so long as Philippine politics constantly being moralized. That's the problem. Okay? So again, to be clear, recap. When we're talking about moral politics, we talk about the demarcation line. So are we saying that the process of formulating moral claims is entirely subjective? Not necessarily. It's subjective, yes, but it is also objectively grounded on our class position. Right? Okay, so here's so far. On Friday, we're going to use the framework of moral politics to assess Philippine history, particularly to the EDSAs, EDSA 1, EDSA 2, EDSA 3. Again, EDSA 1 is a manifestation of what type of moral discourse? Moral. EDSA 2.
Civic exclusion.
Civic exclusion. We talk about that, right? We talk about the case of Joseph Estrada. Did Joseph Estrada ever publicly step down from office? Did he? Never did. Right? Of course, he was corrupt. Right? But again, Saka's asserting that it's just a manifestation of civic exclusivism. Sorry, yeah, civic exclusivism, but S&P was a manifestation of populism. Okay, that's what we're going to talk about today. Very quickly, is this framework relevant up until today?
Yes.
It is, but the specifics of the theory is something which you might have to rethink. Why? Because again, the point is that the dual public sphere is grounded on the state of your economy. And because the economy changes, your public spheres would likewise change. Diba? That's just one thing to think about. How might we reformulate Otaru's theory of dual public spheres? Okay? So we'll end there on Friday as usual. And then next week we'll talk about related to moral politics. But we'll talk about the relationship between political polarization and urban fragmentation. So basically the relationship between politics and development. Okay? I'll see you all on Friday. It's lunchtime, so have a great day.
Yes, sir.